Hello to all of our listeners out there in the land of blockchain and otherwise. My name is Alex Paul Manders, and I'm a director at the Information Services Group. My core responsibility is to lead and manage our ISG Blockchain Now Global and Services and Solutions line. And I'm joined with my two colleagues, Jason Stading and Cole Flashenberg, as we explore the world of blockchain with a number of guest speakers and leaders, specifically from Dole, Bear, MediLedger, Hashed Health, and Sprint. Our guest speakers are going to talk a lot about different applications and use cases as they relate to supply chain and otherwise, and we hope that you will find some value throughout the course of the series. I'd like to now go ahead and kick off the episode with our first speaker. Cole, Jason, and I are excited today to have a conversation with Muffie Fulton, who is in San Francisco. And so, Muffie, before we get into the Q&A, it would be wonderful if you would take a few minutes to share a little bit about yourself and MediLedger, the organization that you're currently working with.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I am the Senior Director of Pharma Solutions at Chronicled, which is the company that has created the MediLedger project and the MediLedger network, which will probably come up again today. I have a long history in pharma supply chain and biotech supply chain. I was at Genentech and Roche for about 14 years, very much on the supply side. Ended my career there with a team that planned much of the biologics drug supply for Roche globally. And for a little bit, I led the supply chain practice at 23andMe, direct-to-consumer genetic testing. And I did something a little bit weird. I ran a food business for a little while, which might come up in our questions in the future. And then I've been at Chronicled for almost 2 years now, working on blockchain in pharma supply chain.
Fantastic. And so, Muffie, one of the questions that we've been asking everybody that we've talked to is how they got started with the technology. Because back a few years ago, there were different use cases for the technology. And it's kind of interesting to hear how everybody got their start with it and how you became involved with blockchain and doing what you do now.
While, preparing for this podcast, because I really came at it from more the business side and the business problem side than the technology itself. Suzanne Somerville is our CEO at Chronicled, and we worked together for many years at Genentech. And we both left Roche and Genentech about the same time, and really were doing totally different things. And we'd get together and talk, and I'd hear about what she was doing. And she was really talking about how to solve some really fundamental problems in pharma supply chain, namely, the security of the supply chain and having the industry be able to respond to the law that Congress passed in 2013 called the Drug Supply Chain Security Act. And the goal of that act was really to make sure that we did not have counterfeit drugs in the supply chain to really ensure patient safety. And because we really, and Suzanne especially, along with our MediLedger co-founder, Eric Garvin, came at it from that perspective. Is we have an industry problem. We want to secure the supply chain. The industry needs to meet these DSCSA requirements over a number of years. It's a phased implementation. And the first problem they're trying to solve is something called Saleable Returns. And in Saleable Returns, basically, a drug distributor like a McKesson or AmerisourceBergen has to confirm the, for example, expiration date, lot number, item number, et cetera, for an individual carton of drug that's been returned from a retailer, not from a patient, but from a retailer, something like a Walmart or a Walgreens. And then before they're able to sell that to another retailer and return it into the supply chain, they have to confirm those product identifiers with the manufacturer directly. So it's a pretty complicated problem. There's over 1,000 manufacturers for the U.S. market. There's 100 distributors and many more retailers than that. So basically, you needed a way to check this information in less than a second for every carton before you before you sell it. And so they really came at it from the business perspective and how is it going to work? And what they found was that blockchain was going to be a really great way to solve complicated product. Well, it's actually a simple question. It's a complicated network and a complicated industry to do this in. So I was hearing this from Suzanne. I was hearing it along the way as she was developing it, and I was doing something else. And it just got to the point where I had to join because it was so interesting and so exciting and a really interesting way to change the pharma supply chain in a way I hadn't expected before.
And so, Muffie, you mentioned a few different things there, and that's a great story, by the way, and how you came into blockchain, because your perspective from the business angle is highly key in a lot of the conversations that we've been having, right? We're kind of moving beyond just the conversation of the technology, but not losing sight of the technology, but really beginning to focus on the business solutions that it can support or the business opportunities that could be better enabled with the technology. And that said, you mentioned the DSCSA and a few other things, which takes us into the next question of what has really kept you excited about the technology? Where do you see the technology going in the pharmaceutical supply chain over the next couple of years? Like, why do you get up out of bed and say, I am going to do blockchain in the pharmaceutical supply chain today? And I want to do it for the next 3 years. What is it that our listeners should kind of keep in mind on that topic?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about solving complex business problems. And this technology is a way to enable that. There is a lot of value in the trading patterns and information in the pharma industry. Huge value, which is why a lot of it is so secret. And therefore, you need some interesting and new ways to actually solve these problems. So we didn't have tools like this to solve exciting business problems like this. So that's what's actually keeping me excited about it, is the business problem and how the technology can kind of keep up with it and help the industry, really, not just individual companies, but the industry solve a mandate from Congress, but also, for everyone, because we want secure supply chains. So it's just exciting that we have this kind of technology that can solve really big problems at this point.
Well, we think it's fantastic that you're a pioneer along with Chronicled and pushing the blockchain agenda forward with the efforts that you are all working on in solving these complex problems. And I think that sometimes the general population get confused about what blockchain is, the value of the technology, even understanding how it can be applied in their business. So if we think about myself or Jason, Cole, our families, we all some way, shape, or form interact with the pharmaceutical industry, directly or indirectly. And I'm curious as to what your perspective is on what should the average person understand about blockchain is the value it brings to your industry related to the pharmaceutical supply chain. Like if you were to just say, hey, to the listeners, these are the couple of things that you should take away with what we're working on at Chronicled or MediLedger, what would those be?
Yeah, I think, when we talk about pharma or we talk about healthcare, I think that's the first thing that comes to mind is patients and people, and that's a good thing. And I want to say that certainly blockchain is in the future. It's not necessarily this second in pharma at the patient level. We've certainly have products and implementations out there. Our company, we have one. But at the patient level, I think it's a little bit in the future, but not too much in the future, maybe a few years. So one of the big advantages of blockchain for patients is privacy. I know there's a lot of concern about people's data being out there in the cloud somewhere for very good reasons, of course, that we've seen over the last few years. And we actually at MediLedger use blockchain as a tool, as a part of what we do. But there's a lot of levels of privacy and cryptography on top of that. So I think on the one hand, for sure, blockchain's out there and it's coming. But I think patients need to know that it's, HIPAA exists and companies take HIPAA pretty seriously in my experience. And so there are many levels of privacy that are going to be able to protect folks at the patient level. I think, on the other hand, it is a good idea to know what's happening and what's going on out there. For example, I know that, we think a little bit about tackling some of the big healthcare challenges with blockchain, something like the opioid epidemic or tracking opioid use through blockchain. And that doesn't necessarily need to be at the patient level, but it could be at a retailer level, et cetera. And it can be tricky when it comes to patient privacy. It's one of the reasons it's not out there right now, is because that privacy really does need to be ensured. So on the one hand, I think it is coming. There are options for privacy and anonymity, some good ones, frankly. But it's probably also really a good idea to know a little bit about what's going on so that you know where your data is going to be going and how it's going to be secured.
And that's helpful to draw the link or the separation between the patient and other use cases that are going on, a couple of which you mentioned during your discovery of blockchain through conversations with Suzanne and others. And it would be great if you could then walk us through some of the use cases that you're currently working on, and then those that might be future state use cases. Because the listeners oftentimes will hear all kinds of different use cases across different industries, and I think that MediLedger and Chronicle have been very diligent in defining what they are working on, and then have been able to get organizations to align with your project and really start to create value. And so any insights that you can share with us on what use cases are being done right now, as opposed to those that have been discussed that could potentially become things, and those that you think might happen at some point in the future, would be really insightful for all of us.
Yeah, so the product I mentioned is called Product Verification Solution, where a distributor needs to confirm the characteristics, expiry, lot number, et cetera, of an individual carton of product before they resell it when it's returned. And they need to confirm that information with the manufacturer. Our PVS solution is actually out there. The requirement from the FDA and from the DSCSA law to start doing that verification by the distributors started last November. The FDA has given the industry a little bit of enforcement discretion for a year. It said you can't stop the work you're doing. Everyone needs to have this in place, but we're not going to start enforcing it until this coming November. So companies are in the process of getting it going, basically. The big distributors are already doing it. SAP uses our MediLedger as their product verification solution. So right now, we've got a product out there that greater than 90% of the transactions, the verification transactions in the U.S. pharma supply chain are going across. And so, as I mentioned, it's kind of a simple question, but a complex problem to solve because of the huge network. And you basically need an interoperable system linking the entire pharmaceutical industry in order to do this. And we've really made a lot of strides in getting that done with the product verification solution, PVS, that we've got out there. Now, that leads us directly into, once we have a network that the industry knows how to run and can run, because it's a blockchain network, so individual companies and solution providers are actually running their own nodes in the network. Now that that's in place, where can we drive value beyond just regulatory requirements? And so we're working on a contracting and chargeback solution that we've got a number of really big players in the industry working on already, and that's going to come out this summer throughout, with go lives throughout the end of the year. And that's really taking this very complex problem of chargebacks in the pharmaceutical industry, simplifying it, getting the industry to agree on rules, and then using this network that we already have in place to look at revenue management and financial processes, where you can really drive a lot more value out of work you've already done, getting this blockchain-based network in place. And then beyond that, the last implementation step for the DSCSA law is confidential change of ownership system throughout the entire pharmaceutical supply chain. So basically, having a system that ensures that the product going from the manufacturer all the way to the retailer at this point, not necessarily to the patient level, is accounted for. When you, as a, for example, distributor, receive a drug, you know it came from your manufacturer. When the distributor sends it off to that retailer, that retailer knows that all along the way, every stop in the supply chain has been validated and verified by the system, yet it's confidential. So no one is going to have access to all of the business intelligence and the trade and trade movements within the pharmaceutical supply chain. Nobody would get on board with that kind of transparency at this level at this point. So we actually just ran an FDA project on that. FDA had a pilot program for projects to meet those 2023 DSCSA requirements. And we just wrapped that project up. We had over 25 companies participating at all different levels of supply chain. We had, folks like FedEx and Walgreens and Walmart, in addition to Roche and Pfizer and GSK, AmerisourceBergen, McKesson, all the big players really in the industry came together to see how can we meet this kind of further requirement of DSCSA, where we need even more of the industry to be in one, hopefully one interoperable network, or maybe multiple interoperable networks, so we can track pharmaceuticals throughout the entire supply chain. So that's what we're tackling. There are big problems and big challenges in the pharma supply chain, but we're making pretty good progress.
And it sounds like, this is a very big thing. And, I think some of it, stems clearly out of the DSCSA. And so I'm going to kind of ask a question based on some of your responses there. Do you see a future where the organizations that are collaborating now to get through this DSCSA legislation, continue to collaborate and create new solutions that are not driven from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, because we have a really clear principle around industry first. We want this to be something that the industry benefits from, not individual companies, not individual segments of the supply chain, but really the entire supply chain. And so we talk a lot about governance and how we want to govern this network going forward, because as I mentioned, companies and solution providers run the nodes themselves. So we are really a basically network manager and custodian, and we run working groups that inform the requirements for the products, and what's happening is really driven by the industry itself. If they're not interested in doing something, we're clearly not going to do it. And we have started to talk about how do the companies in the working group kind of bubble up new questions? How do we kick off new working groups? Why would we do such a thing? What kind of input do we need to do that? And so, we're really moving along the tracks to get to a kind of industry led and governed governance process where we're the custodians and kind of neutral party within the industry to bring folks together and drive solutions that really everyone benefits from.
And so on the topic, it's a great segue into my next question or topic that I want to have you inform our listeners on is this whole idea of collaboration models, specific to an industry or otherwise. It's clear that Chronicle and MediLedger, you have developed relationships with some of the largest, if not the largest, pharmaceutical companies in the world. You have obviously got them all to align and collaborate, and there's a piece of regulation or legislation that is helping drive that. But what tips would you have for the listener or any organization out there that's trying to either become a part of a consortia or create their own working group that's a public working group or private working group? because in my journeys here, that a lot of different organizations they're interested in the idea of getting in a working group. Sometimes they want to do it more public. Sometimes they want to do it more private. And we spend a lot of time trying to enable them on how to do that. And you with Chronicled and MediLedger have been successful in this. So what would you inform the listeners on your experience, what they could do, also what you've seen not be successful? And I'm really curious to know about your prior comment on governance, because I personally believe that, technology is about 10% of the challenge with this whole topic. 90% of the challenge is around the people and the processes and the alignment, the governance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that I want to pause and just kind of tee that over to you, Muffie.
Yeah, I agree. We have had some really great success with our working groups. They are successful. We have the biggest companies in the industry joining, giving their opinions, but also frankly paying us for that, because we have become a really valuable tool for them to get things done and to get industry-wide challenges met. And so I think that part of the secret is that we really come at it from, again, problem perspective, business case perspective, not from a technology perspective. So MediLedger was never a solution looking for a problem or a solution that was already done looking for customers. It was a question: how do we meet these 2019 DSCSA requirements for what essentially needed to be an interoperable network for the entire pharmaceutical industry? And that was the problem. And so companies needed to get together to solve this problem because it was an industry-wide problem. And because of the way that Eric and Suzanne, had been involved in what was previously the serialization project throughout the industry, they were in the right place. But they also really came at it from perspective of being a neutral party. We want to facilitate this. We have some technical resources, which we know this in the end is going to be some sort of technology solution. But let's talk about what the problems are and what the requirements are for meeting this business need, and then think about what the solution is and what the technology is. So what I'd say is the biggest thing to do is find a business case, a use case, a business problem. Don't find a technology to solve a problem that's not yet known. I think beyond that, we don't have voting. We have very little conflict within our governance process, within our working group process. Partly, I think that's because we're a neutral party, because we also have really clear principles around being industry first, not MediLedger first, not Chronicled first. It's really about industry first and solving problems for the industry. And that's the whole industry, not just big companies or the ones making the most money, but the solutions we're coming up with need to work for everyone. And maybe bigger companies are going to pay more for those solutions than little companies because they can't afford to do that. And we want to make sure that works. It's not always just about money. It's about input, and it's about, gaining those, getting those requirements from, all different aspects of the industry, which we really proactively do. So I think those things have all been really, really important. I also think a lot of just the people side of it is really important. We are kind of radically transparent. We will get up in front of our working group and say, we don't know how to solve this. Can we talk about it so that you guys can give us some ideas, or you can tell us what else has worked and what hasn't worked? Or last time you gave us this requirement and it doesn't make sense to us because of this other thing. Now, what are we missing here? Or is this just a legacy of, using EDI since the 1960s? Who knows? So we're really, really transparent. It was actually an interesting shift to come from a pretty big, worldwide company, even then a smaller company, and then come to the startup and really have kind of retune yourself on what you share with your customers and what you don't, because frankly, we share all of it with our customers and with our working group members. And I think that really engenders a huge amount of trust. And so I think that's another really big piece. And that's maybe part of the secret sauce. You need the right people running it, and you need it run in the right way.
Very insightful. And I couldn't agree with you. More on some of those points around approaching it from a business challenge and really trying to just be transparent and get feedback from people in the group, because it is obviously a challenge that no one has a playbook for, to come up with a solution. And on that topic, then, you're in a unique situation where you have a solution that can then be put into the enterprise, but the enterprise itself still has to, in some cases, get internal stakeholder alignment and support to adopt your solution or the collective consortia solution. What, if anything, have you seen, and you don't have to name names of clients or whatever, but what are some of the tactics that you've seen these organizations use to get more internal support within their own organizations and then come back to you and say, hey, I'm company XYZ. I just went into my firm, got support from, these 4 people, and now we want to do this with Chronicle and MediLedger. Just curious of your perspective or experience there.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing about that is there's not just one answer, and we've seen different things be successful at different companies. And so, I guess that's good and bad. There's not just one answer, but what it does mean is you need to know the companies well enough to know what answer is going to work for that company. So one thing we've definitely seen is something like a center of excellence or a center of innovation within the IT groups. And they actually are already, working on blockchain, or they have one person dedicated to it, or they have 5 people dedicated to it. And they're looking at ways to, prove that blockchain can actually work for the industry. And this meeting these DSCSA requirements is a really good way to do, because companies have to meet them. There's no option there. And so if you have this center of excellence that's looking to have a great proof of concept, or beyond a proof of concept, an actual product in the world working, going through those kind of centers of innovation within IT groups has worked in some companies. Now, of course, in those companies, you absolutely have to get the business folks involved, and definitely for some of our working group member companies where they do have those centers of innovation where they're focusing on blockchain, we often have an IT member on the working group, and they also send a business member because you always have to have the business side too. I don't think that's going to be news to anybody out there. I think on the other side, and probably a place where things can go a little smoother when you actually need to get that contract signed, is when you have those business folks in the room and they're talking specifically about their business needs. Because if you're the person who's going to save the company many millions of dollars a year, you can drive IT to get on board, you can drive procurement, you can drive legal to get on board, and we need all of those. Because we're talking about new technology, I think it's probably not news to too many people that, the pharma industry is not innovative on the business process and IT side of the world. They're innovative in drug discovery, and that's where they need to be innovative. But they're not, at the bleeding edge of technology for their IT groups. And so you really do need that business involvement to drive the technology side sometimes, and really get that approval and get those contracts signed. We've even seen probably that we need a little bit more engagement with legal and procurement because, again, it's a new technology. And if you're in the pharma world or healthcare world in any way, legal groups are very interested and very knowledgeable about intellectual property. And when you tell them you're going to take some data and you're going to, hide it cryptographically, and then you're going to post it onto a ledger that anybody in the network can see for all time, it's going to take a little bit of education for them to feel okay that, that doesn't actually tell anyone anything about your company. And it's okay legally. We're not giving away any of your intellectual property.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I was kind of chuckling there with your last comment, because I agree from firsthand experience. It is quite the conversation to have with anyone from legal as it relates to blockchain. All right, well, let me do this. I want to kind of kick it over to my co-host here, Cole Flashenberg, for a question for you, Muffie.
My question: what types of education do you think the industry and enterprise teams need in order to be successful with shaping a blockchain-focused program?
Yeah, so We have, like I said, definitely taken a lot of time to do education around blockchain. We don't really focus too much on the actual technology. We talk a little bit about the cryptography because that is really important to our industry. And people need to understand the basics, but we really talk a lot about what blockchain should be used for and what we would use it for. And that's, really in the cases where you want an immutable ledger, kind of something, quote, notarized. We've got multiple companies or entities with private data that they don't want to share, but needs to be validated against business rules. And so when we come at it from that perspective, when we talk about why we would use this, why we wouldn't use this technology, and what the problem is and the business use case, that's, where we've had the most success. It takes a lot more education than one expects. And most of that education is not on the technology. It's really on our principles, what you would use blockchain for, and why we would be doing it in these specific business cases.
Hey, Muffie, this is Jason here. I have a follow-up question for you. Thinking about the pharmaceutical industry specifically, what should our listeners take away in terms of how blockchain is disrupting that industry and has the potential to really change the business processes and the supply chain as a whole?
People get it on a regular basis. Is blockchain really coming? What's really happening? And I'll say, yes, blockchain's coming. I think, and my company thinks for sure it's going to replace EDI. EDI has been around for quite a long time, and it facilitates a lot of trade and business processes, not just in the pharma industry, but in many, many industries. But it's going to be replaced by private networks, private permission networks like the one that we've created for pharma. We're also going to be taking ERP outside of company walls and really moving it to what we call, and I think a lot of people are starting to call, industry resource planning between companies, planning resources outside of your company boundary. And you can do that in a private way with a lot of the things that we've developed in blockchain. So for sure it's coming. It's not scary. It's not all, Bitcoin. There's a lot of different options, a lot of different tools. Blockchain is just one piece of the many tools that we've created to create our network. But it is certainly coming, and it's going to be a game changer in a lot of ways.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Muffie. That was a great answer.
Hey, Muffie, this is Cole again. What resources, like websites, conferences, do you leverage to get most of your information and keep up to date in the market?
Yeah, we are either guests or members of a decent number of industry organizations like HDA or PDSA. And we, because of what we're doing, have certainly a lot of interest and actually membership in our working groups from standards bodies like GS1. That's on one of our working groups. HIBIC is on a different one of our working groups. And then there's a lot of kind of, boutique conferences that go on, things on specifically like chargebacks, contracting, pharma regulatory in some ways. And then, on the business and IIT side, we've spoken at now, I think, at least one ISG conference, and we've got another one coming up. So that's a good way for us to connect to, other executives in the industry and to hear what other technologies out there. So yeah, those are kind of that's the main purpose of our industry involvement.
All right. So Muffie, what we'd like to do now is transition into a couple questions for the listener to kind of learn a little bit more about you personally, as opposed to the body of knowledge you have on blockchain and pharmaceuticals. So that said, I'm going to let my co-hosts take turns here and ask you a handful of questions, and then we can kind of kick those around. Does that work for you?
Sounds great.
Awesome. All right. So Cole, go ahead.
So what's kind of a low technology hobby that you have and might enjoy doing in your downtime?
Yeah, that was an interesting thing to think about. I mentioned kind of at the beginning that for about 3 years I had my own company where I taught the science of cooking and modernist cuisine, and I actually ran food tours all over the world. And so currently, while I'm not doing that, and I'm doing something very different in the technology and pharma world, I still enjoy doing a lot of modernist cooking, and, learning about the science of cooking. I have a kind of unusual kitchen. Doesn't look like most people's kitchen. But I use a lot of what I learned while I was running my business and teaching folks to do some cooking based a little bit more on science than the average bear.
Wow, that's really interesting. You don't really think of science coming into cooking, but that's definitely a cool hobby to have.
It's all chemistry in the end.
Very cool.
Muffie, this is Jason again. I have a question for you, kind of shifting gears back to technology. If you could create a technology to do something that you don't like to do, what would it be?
Yeah, I think I can get a lot of my fellow San Francisco Bay Area residents on board with teleportation because traffic is terrible. So yeah, that's what I'd like.
I love it.
Yeah, teleportation will work here in Austin, Texas as well.
Yeah, New York could use it as well. So
yeah, there's a lot of places.
If you guys are onto anything.
Yeah.
You guys figure it out. Let us know.
Yeah.
Our next working group.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go. Well, we can talk about cooking and science as well. I know Mr. Cole Flaschenberg and Jason Stading both like to eat. So
that's true.
All right, my last question is more career focused. So, is there an aspiration that you have in your career going forward, either technology or not technology related, that you have in mind, that a goal that you really want to achieve?
Yeah, I think the thing that really interests me is seeing the impact of what we're doing from a company perspective. So I'd really like to see and have a big impact on an industry, and I think we're actually going to do that at MediLedger and Chronicled. So that's why I'm here, because we have a lot of ability and a lot of potential to make big changes. So that's why I'm here.
Cool, really cool.
That's great.
Love it. And my last question is so it sounds to me like you have had quite a bit of hands-on experience with many different types of technology throughout your career. What is your favorite piece of technology or device that you've come across? Yeah,
similar and along the lines of my modernist cuisine knowledge and experience, along with something I didn't mention is I'm a scientist by training, and I did kind of basic science research in neuroscience for a number of years, and something we actually used in the lab, which is basically an immersion circulator to hold a water bath at exactly the temperature that you want, has now been applied to cooking. And so you may have heard of sous vide before. So that's my favorite actual way to cook. It's extremely precise, but also very easy and not a lot of effort. It's actually kind of a low effort way to cook perfectly. So my favorite thing to do from a technology perspective or device is sous vide, cooking sous vide.
Very cool.
I've always wanted to try it.
You should give it a shot.
I've tasted it after it's been cooked that way. I've never actually tried cooking it that way, and I want to.
Cole, have you ever had it?
I have not, but I'm really interested now.
Yeah, I promise you have had it if you've eaten at a restaurant.
Okay, that's fair.
Not all restaurants, but a lot of restaurants, especially kind of the mid to high end, for sure are using sous vide cooking. So a lot of people have eaten it and don't really know that they have.
Cole's definitely eaten at a restaurant. He absolutely has.
I'm already looking it up, and I'm definitely interested. Need to get into it.
Do we want to get into it on the? I mean, that's kind of off topic. We can talk about it then. Well, Muffie, step in and correct me if I'm off base here, but the way I understand that it works is you take the piece of food and you seal it in a bag, right? And then it's attached to a device, and you put that in, you submerge it in hot water that's controlled, and the water circulates around it. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's just about right. You do take a piece of food and put it in a bag and try to get as much air out as possible. And basically the device is just to keep the water bath at a certain temperature, the exact temperature you want. So if you want some medium rare steak at 52 Celsius, sorry, I'm a metric person, then you set your water at 52. You can't overcook it. So it's low temperature cooking. But if your water never gets hotter than 52 degrees, your steak is never going to get more than medium rare. You can leave it in there for 2 hours and you can leave it in there for 8 hours. I'd suggest 2 hours. At 8 hours, you're going to get a little bit of a mushy steak, but it's still going to be nice and pink. That's why it's so precise, because you really can't overcook something. And you actually can do some things that you can't do any other way, actually. And so there's lots and lots of options for it. A lot of people think, oh, you cook a steak sous vide, but you can actually cook a whole lot of things sous vide, not just meat. I used to teach actually a vegan class. Not that I'm a vegan, but there's a lot of options for vegetarian cooking with sous vide too. So yeah, that's basically the key thing is nothing can overcook if you set the temperature and never go over that temperature.
Well, it sounds like at some point in time, Muffie, you could apply your blockchain knowledge to sous vide cooking and come up with something new for the industry, yeah?
There you go. There you go.
Well, thank you so much, Muffie, for all your time. And as always, it's great always talking to you and learning more about what Chronicled and MediLedger are up to and things of that nature. So wanted to obviously thank you on behalf of our listeners and by all means, let's keep in touch and do this again.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alex. This was great. It was great talking to all of you, and I always like to learn from you and learn what's happening on the technology side, especially amongst many different industries and many different consortia. So thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. All right. Well, we're going to sign off here from Austin, Texas, and San Francisco, and Coles in New Jersey somewhere. So that said, we will look forward to the next episode and go from there. All right.
Thanks so much, Muffie.
Thanks, Muffie.
Well, we hope you found today's podcast episode valuable and insightful. And on behalf of the Information Services Group, Jason Stating and Cole Flashenberg, we'd like to thank you for listening. And we encourage you to listen to the future episodes. And also, with any questions you might have about ISG or ISG Blockchain Now, please visit isg1.com to learn more about our firm and what we do with blockchain. Thank you.